usual way, very quickly, the results of the proficiency testing scheme, which obviously is organized at the WRL. Over to you, Anna.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this session. As Dan said, I will be going over the results for the 2015 proficiency testing scheme. I hope for those of you that did participate, you should have received your results as well as an entire report about all of the different samples and all of the different results that we expected. If you haven't, or if you have any questions about it, please come see me or email me at a later time. So as Don said, this is going to be quite quick, and I just like to highlight a few things that may raise discussion later on for the various different panels. So this work is done in the World Reference Lab with quite a large team that I've mentioned here that I'd like to thank ahead of time for all of their hard work. So the purpose of the proficiency testing scheme, I like to kind of split into two different sections of why we do it. One is to ensure countries are able to identify FMD in their country. So we do this through this PTS as well as training and consultation. And the second one is to try to harmonize the different assays amongst the reference lab. And again, we do this through the proficiency testing scheme and how different labs are comparing on samples, as well as the distribution of reagents and protocols. And if you are in the need of training or reagents or protocols, or we can assist with anything else, of course, you're more than free to talk to me or anyone else of the World Reference Lab team. So in 2015, we had 63 countries that participated worldwide. This is a slight increase from 2014, and actually we foresee that this number will be even higher for the current 2016 proficiency testing scheme. For the European Union, who is obligated to participate, I'm happy to say that all labs participated except for one, but that one country actually has a contract with a neighboring country to do the diagnostic work in case they do have an outbreak. So there were 3 panels that were distributed. Ooh, I seem to have some kind of error. The first panel is our infectious panel. So this one contains live virus and is from susceptible vesicular disease cases, so this is for virus detection. Panel 2 has always been a non-infectious panel, which can be used for virus, genome, and antigen detection. And then panel 3 is the serological panel, which laboratories test their non-structural assays as well as your structural. As you can see, this is actually a change from the past, which we used to have a panel 4, which contained SVD. The reason that we did not include SVD in 2015 is because the OIE actually deregulated that, and so we lost the funding under EURL for SVD for that panel. And I'll go back more into that later on about what the situation looks like for 2016. Oh. Sorry, I'm not quite sure why I did that. So panel 1, and as said, this is going to be very brief conclusions. The sample that we chose was part of the OCMEA 98 lineage, so it was a South Korean virus. The interpretation was that the real-time PCR, actually all samples were identified correctly by all labs, which I think is a very positive conclusion. We did have, one lab did have problems with both the virus isolation as well as the antigen ELISA. This was the same lab, and I encouraged that laboratory to come and speak to us about what they can do. Just for a discussion point, I find it quite interesting the number of different cell lines that are currently being used for this type of work. So we have everything from the more popular cell lines like IBRS2 that we're probably all familiar with some of the less popular like SK6. Ashley, who's in the audience, actually has a poster on some of these and the susceptibility to FMD on some of these cell lines. I should note that the sample that we sent to you is quite a hot sample as it is been cell cultured, so it has quite a high titer. And I think that's important to remember when you're interpreting these results. So panel 2, as I said, is our non-infectious panel, therefore a lot more laboratories are able to participate in this. So we had 57 labs that received this panel, and there's really 2 tests that labs carry out. One is the antigen ELISA, and the other one is the real-time RT-PCR, with the real-time RT-PCR being the more popular of the 2. These are the samples. I did sneak in an SVD sample, and this was really because I know a lot of people need it for their accreditation work, and as well, we wanted to ensure that the tests that were being used were not picking up the SVD sample as an FMD sample. The other samples that were chosen are what we felt were current threats to the region, so particularly Europe, but also in other areas. So you can see that we have an India 2001 sample, as well as the SAT2 that was seen in Egypt, Iran 05, Sind 08, and MIA 98. That's also part of panel 1. The reason why these are not 2015 samples is because these actually get picked usually in January of 2015. So, as in the past, the antigen ELISAs seems to have caused some problems. So there was one ambiguous sample, which was sample number 5, in which various labs determined different serotypes, and we ended up accepting all results. Sample 6 also mistyped, but looking at all of the methods and what people were using, I think this probably mistyped due to the reagents that those countries were using. So we're working with those countries to make sure that they are using the correct assays and the correct strains with those. Again, the real-time RT-PCR is very consistent amongst all the laboratory, although there's one lab that we need to do follow-up with. And I think this is very important because it does show that people are able to detect FMD, and I think serotype is always something that can come downstream. I think most of you are aware of this, but the Pirbright Institute no longer supplies the antigen ELISA. We are now working with Eisler in a partnership where we have new kits based on our monoclonal systems that are actually much easier to use, and we've had very good results with. If you're interested in these, you can of course talk to Emmy, who's on the panel, or Alison Morris, who's sitting in the audience, or you can contact us at Pirbright. For panel 3, I think this is always the one that gives the most headaches to everyone. We had 58 labs that participated. And what I find very interesting is that there's actually a lot of different tests that are being used for this. So everyone is using the NSP, but then you've also got the serotype-specific assays available from PriorCheck, IDVet. Then you have the solid phase, which includes some of the kits from Isler and Pirbright, as well as the liquid phase and the VNT. And if I go on to the next slide, I think this is actually causing a lot of difficulty in interpretation because labs are tending to use a lot of different assays, getting different results on different assays, and then trying to make sense of how you combine all of these results is causing a lot of confusion. Of course, there's also the confusion that we have every year when I do this of the cross-reactivity. So a lot of you by now are probably used to my little charts or graphs where the top left corner, which is here, is the number of labs that agreed with the World Reference Lab 10 times testing. So this shows that 13 laboratories 13 samples were positive by the reference laboratory, so the WRL, as well as the labs. And then this corner would be if the sample was negative. This up here would be if there was ambiguous results between the World Reference Lab and the laboratory. So it's great that 13 labs agreed with the 10 times testing. However, you have all of these labs that did not for various reasons. So some of this is because they simply don't have that serotype in the lab. Some of this is because they're using different strains that may no longer be representative. Some of it could simply be down to the sample or the environment in which the sample was tested, and it's actually very difficult to sort out why this is happening. I think what's important for this is really to remember the limitation of the assays that are being used, and also why you're using the assay that you are using. So I think it's very important to ask yourself what is your research question and what is your diagnostic question, and then based on that question, choosing the appropriate assay. And again, that's something that you can look towards us or to any other reference laboratory to advise you in. The other thing is, especially in situations that are free of FMD, if you do have an outbreak, you will most likely know what the serotype is. So you can very easily limit the amount of serotypes you test for serology. So if you have a serotype O outbreak, you may only use a PriorCheck serotype O kit, and so you avoid some of this cross-reactivity. So for the 2016 PTS, I have changed things up a little bit. which some of you will notice and have gotten a lot of emails from me. And the reason for this really is from feedback that we've received not only from you, but also from the PTS Advisory Board about what we're trying to achieve. So panel 1 is probably the biggest change. This is now available as both infectious and non-infectious. So in the past, this was always just an infectious panel. And what we've done with this is to use these samples as if they were cases from your country. So the aim of this is to use your contingency plan or your flow chart or your SOP or whatever method you have to run the samples as if they were from your country. So if you're not going to test all of those samples by virus isolation, or you're not going to test them all by real-time RT-PCR, then you do not carry out those results and report on them. Additionally, if sequencing is something that you do, which I know a lot of you do, then you can sequence this virus and let us know. So it's to follow your plan. And as you will see when you get the description of these panels, I have given examples of where these samples have come from. So this, I just gave an example here of an owner that reported a suspicion of EuFMD and what they've seen. So you can use this information as well to help you decide what tests you need to carry out. What I also like to mention is that we are able to include SVD again, and that's because of the kindness of the EURL of the European Union giving us money as the EURL for FMD for SVD, which is a bit confusing, but it does mean we have money to do the SVD part again. So SVD is included in that. Panel 2 is a non-infectious panel now, but that's really for quality assurance purposes. So it is to test your assays to see whether or not the latest strains or the latest threats are being picked up by those assays. So this is where you can throw whatever assay that you have against it and see whether or not it's picking up the latest strains. Panel 3, and this is really from a lot of this cross-reactivity and the difficulties in interpreting the data, has again changed. And in this, we're really trying for you to use the information that you gathered from the outbreak, so from panel 1, to decide what to do with panel 3. So it's no longer a matter of throwing all of your assays against it. You can use the information from panel 1 to tailor how you would test for these samples. And I really hope that this is a better and a much clearer way for labs to analyze their results. I have added a little extra one, so you can throw a little extra scenario that you can throw all of your tests against and see how it does against those serum for those of you who need to do that for accreditation. If you have any questions or concerns, you can always email myself, anna.ludi, or our wonderful reference lab administrators, which most of you probably know by now, Julie and Sarah. And if you haven't participated in the past, we're always happy to have new participants. So if it's something that you're thinking of doing for your country or for your company, then feel free to email us. And with that, I'd just like to finish. So I just want to thank the World Reference Lab, who's sitting mostly over there, for helping with all of the testing as well as the sample preparation. The Central Service Unit, they are the ones who produce all of our cells, as well as the Proficiency Testing Scheme Advisory Board. So these are the people that help me decide how the setup and how the layout of the team should be. Of course, our funders. We are funded for the proficiency testing scheme mostly through the European Union as well as the FAO. And I'd like to thank you for not only participating in the PTS, but also listening to this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this clear presentation. The floor is open for questions. Anybody a question for Anna? Otherwise, I have a few, but yeah, over there. Wait for the mic, please.
Thanks for the good presentation. My one query is, you said regarding the ELISA test kits based on monoclonal antibodies. A country like Australia, if you want to import those kits, to get the licenses to import those kits, we require the methodology or a certificate that these antibodies were produced in a secure facility where FMD was not handled, or they used inactivated antigen to make those. So because these monoclonals were produced long time back, would we still get those certificates of innocuity and those things so that we can apply for an import permit and we can get those kits easily?
So this is an issue that we're actually facing more and more. I think all of our labs are increasing the biosecurity of not only sending samples but also receiving them. And the problem, as you say, is that a lot of our polyclonal serum that was produced as the Pirbright Institute was sometimes produced in our high containment facilities, which also has FMD in it. It depends specifically which reagents you are after as to what documentation we have. There are also inactivation steps that we could carry out from that, basically now, to make sure that it's free. But those are the type of risk assessments that we actually internally within our organization have to pass to make sure that they work. But it's definitely something we can work with you, and I think Ali Morris is already on thinking about which ones we can send to you that would have the proper certificate.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? Anna, a very practical question. I understood that the antigen ELISA is completely replaced now by the Isler antigen ELISA. The TPI antigen ELISA was for all the 7 serotypes. In the Isler test, we don't have the SAT3.
Yeah. Yes, I know. So we still have the reagents available for people who are interested in SAT3 to purchase. It's just not in the kit format. One of the reasons why the kit isn't available is that it's actually not picking up some of the latest strains. So looking at it as an entire kit where you have the 7 serotypes, it may no longer make sense to send out kits that actually may not pick up some of the other more common serotypes. But the individual SAT3 reagents are still available.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, I'm aware of the fact that many labs have difficulties with interpretation of liquid phase blocking ELISA results, but not only liquid phase, also solid phase, in terms of cross reactions, or how to interpret that. We have also seen that in the Balkans simulation exercise. How are you going to, well, you don't have to solve it, but is Pirbright going to do a bit of teaching, extra explanation, giving more feedback on that sort of things?
So it is something that is covered in the training course that we put on every year to talk about cross-reactivity, and of course at various of other smaller conferences. I think it's still something that is, especially in an endemic situation, is very hard to actually solve, especially when you may have animals that have been infected with multiple serotypes. And so whether or not that is truly cross-reactivity or you just have less antibodies, there's actually quite difficult. So it's something that we're educating, and I'm hoping that some of the reagents that we make in the future will have less of the cross-reactivity to start with. But yeah, it's a very difficult one to solve.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Yep.
The next speaker